Very good morning and welcome to day 2 of this international conference to commemorate 30 years of India-ASEAN relation. This session, Changing Security Dynamics, it will discuss the changing dimension of security in the region, including traditional and non-traditional security threats. The session would be chaired by Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. He was former Secretary East at the Ministry of Affairs, Government of India. May I request all our participants who have joined us to kindly put in their questions, comments on the chat or through the raise hand option. Now may I request Ambassador Anil Wadhwa to kindly give his opening remarks and conduct the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much to all the participants. Welcome to this session on changing security dynamics as part of our dialogue on changing dynamics on Southeast Asia. Today, as we know, Southeast Asia in general and ASEAN in particular is facing a great challenge amidst the strategic competition for influence in the Indo-Pacific, mainly between the United States and China. As these countries increase their strategic rivalry, countries of the region are in a strategic tug of war that could destabilize this region if they fail to navigate the strategic challenge effectively. Also, countries in the region tend to have divergent interests and priorities, and each member faces their own unique social, economic, and political challenges. As a result, they seem to have no choice but to focus on addressing their own internal affairs. And this emphasis on domestic affairs will definitely affect the well-being of a prominent grouping like ASEAN in the region and beyond the region. So Southeast Asia is not free also from internal and external security challenges. Within the region, there are border disputes, there are disputes and conflicts which of minor nature, which have been festering for some time. There's illegal migration, ethnic crises, and issues surrounding the life of the dammed Mekong River, which has increasingly made headlines in the last few years. There are serious challenges also concerning the territorial disputes in the South China Sea, and other concerns regarding ASEAN's role and relevance in the region and beyond. Countries of the region are also constrained by some other key challenges, and that includes, as we know, demographic changes, uneven social development, disparities in economic development and technology adoption, environmental degradation, and other issues related to politics and the rise of authoritarianism. So as far as ASEAN is concerned, many have said it needs to actually put in extra efforts to sustain and enhance the existing successes and achievements that it has over the years. Of course, ASEAN has been regarded as a catalyst for peace. Therefore, it is vital that ASEAN increases its strengths and steps up to promote the rule of law in the region. ASEAN must also promote transparency, and at the same time, it needs to enhance closer coordination and regional connectivity. More collective efforts are perhaps required to address the development gap, especially regarding healthcare, education, technology adoption, and infrastructure development. But more importantly, ASEAN also needs to work hard to enhance the development of inclusive growth, sustainable development, and democracy. It needs to work together to help less developed members to catch up with the others in the region. And then, of course, closer attention and investments is required on the development of a knowledge-based and digital economy, which is ASEAN's aim. So in all this, I presume, what is required is for the ASEAN to work collaboratively rather than individually, particularly with regard to a regional response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And therefore, what many members of the ASEAN have already said regarding the need to avoid isolationism, protectionism, and nationalism is very important. The challenge is, of course, how to adopt and support and then embrace regionalism and multilateralism constructively and genuinely working together to achieve common goals and realize the ASEAN community vision. Also, countries of the region need to enhance cooperation and coordination, as well as to proactively engage regional and global players. That includes countries like Australia, like China, Japan, India, South Korea, the United States, and increasingly the European Union, which has come out with its own Indo-Pacific strategy to address regional challenges. Also, it's important for the need to strike a good balance between commercial gains and environmental protection in order to achieve inclusive growth and sustainable development. There are some critical issues facing the region concerning the Mekong River and disputes in the South China Sea. So I presume the way forward for ASEAN is to thrive despite the growing uncertainty in the region, and that can only be done by staying united and resilient. But countries like India would like to see ASEAN uphold a rules-based international order, work to conclude the South China Sea Code of Conduct, which takes care of the needs of countries outside the region with an interest in freedom of navigation and overflights, and promote the ASEAN outlook for the Indo-Pacific, with which India has great consonance. India would like to continue to work with countries of the region in areas like commerce, connectivity, defense, tourism, heritage, and digital economy. And I think any ideas which are generated from this panel would be very welcome. So these are formidable challenges which I have just tried to list out, in very brief manner. But to talk in detail about these issues, we have a star-studded panel today, I can see. So without further ado, let me call upon our first panelist, Dr. Xuan Vinh, who is the Deputy Director of the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences in Hanoi. So I would like to hand over the floor to you first, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh,
Go
thank you
ahead.
so much. First of all, I would like to express my thanks to the ICAA and Chris for inviting me to this very relevant conference. Today, I will present some ideas on the rising security uncertainty in the Indo-Pacific and the role of the multilateral mechanism. I have 3 points to share today. The first point is that after the Cold War ended, the world entered a unipolar world with the superiority of the US. However, China's to become the second largest in the second decade of 21st century and the third largest country in terms of military, implemented a more assertive foreign policy, formally challenged America's dominant role. In particular, under Xi Jinping, China seems to have abandoned the strategy of hide your strength, bide your time, enter a period of openly competing for the leading role of US in many corners of the world. On the Russia return under President Putin in a dramatic rise at the sixth largest economy and the fourth largest defense power, Japan, despite its slow growth, is still the world's third largest economy and fifth largest defense country. US-China strategic competition has been dominating the security environment in Indo-Pacific. Under President Obama, US implemented the pivotal then rebalance policy with the biggest goal of containing China. The expansion of security influence, especially China's construction new military footholds in Djibouti or in some artificial features in the South China Sea, created security concerns in the region. In turn, under President Trump, U.S. policy towards China has become more aggressive. More than just trade sanctions, U.S. in addition to having a great military presence in the region with follow-ups in East Asia, relied Quadrian security dialogue, we also call Quad, to challenge China. In the U.S. National Security Strategy 2017, U.S. accused China of seeking to displace the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific region, expand the reaches of its state-driven economy model, and reorder the region in its favor, or using economic inducement and penalties, influence cooperation, and imply military threats to persuade other states to hit its political and security agenda. Especially, U.S. also accused China of expanding its power at the expense of sovereignty of others. Under Biden, U.S. had continued to be taught on China on security. In the context that China has continued to promote comprehensive influence in the Indo-Pacific region, especially it gradually expands military influence in the South Pacific island state. President Biden implemented the policy of tightening relations with allies, raising the Quad to summit level, established the military alliance AUKUS with UK and Australia. In particular, if Trump withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Biden now introduced the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which marked an important turning point in restoring U.S. economic leadership in the region and presenting Indo-Pacific countries an alternative to China's approach to these critical issues, quoted from the White House statement. Now I come to the point number two. Russia's special military campaign against Ukraine seems to mark a new phase in international relations since the Cold War ended. If the Russian explanation is to prevent NATO from expanding to the east, which challenge Russia's security and sovereignty, Western countries and some others consider the event as an act of invading the territory of a sovereign state. Western countries consider, a series of sanctions have also been imposed on Russia. A number of countries in the world hold, but some countries in the world hold neutral views and abstain from a Western drafted resolution against Russia and United Nations. Among the countries that do not directly condemn Russia action are two great powers, that is, those are China and India. The military conflict in Ukraine has really brought the world into a new era, with some saying that new order is being formed. Former Secretary of NATO, Rasmussen, said the event was accelerating a shift toward bipolar new order in which a bloc led by US face off with one led by China, where further clarified by Marxist from Frederick Albert Stephen that the new world order will emerge with determine not only war and peace, but also the global energy, production, distribution, and financial system of the future will look like. In the evolving world order, some US allies in India international interest have no longer sided with the US in implementing action against Russian military activity in Ukraine. At the beginning of March 2022, the Philippines voted in favor of the UN General Assembly resolution condemning Moscow military action in Ukraine. But Philippine President Duterte, who committed to establishing closer defense with Russia, China, and US as well, remained silent on the conflict. And the Philippine Secretary of National Defense, Loren Jana, also stated that the Philippines would stay neutral because the Philippines did not locate beside Ukraine, and it's none of the Philippine business to meddle in whatever they are doing in Europe. Thailand, for its side, also vote to against Russia at the United Nations Assembly. But like the Philippines, Thailand also stay neutral on the conflict for the utmost interest of nation and their people. Another important feature of the evolving world order is that fear of similar event between Russia and Ukraine is pervasive. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida warned about a possible new Ukraine in East Asia. And that is probably why non-NATO countries in Asia-Pacific, such as Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea, joined the recent NATO summit held in Madrid. And I also recall the Philippine Secretary of National Defense, Roland Jana, publicized that the Philippine Armed Forces was preparing for the conflict when he said, the armed forces are crafting plan in case of conflict, not just for the war here, but we are also ready here, right after Russia launched the special military training. It could be the reason that the Philippines will be considering former President Duterte's policy of rejecting alignment with just one country, but friends with everyone. That is the second point of mine. Now I move to the third point. The above situation shows that the countries with national interest now closely linked with many countries, even opposing countries, with following the path of neutrality to find a way out of avoiding being caught in to allow, namely the Philippines and Thailand, as I mentioned about, are two typical examples. In such context, what is unlikely to become a military alliance against Russia or China, AUKUS was formed to serve the purpose of defense rather than attack. Such a context shows the need for a multilateral cooperation mechanism that play a neutral role to settle the tensions. ASEAN is probably the most likely option. The central role of ASEAN or ASEAN centrality has gradually been shaped since the ASEAN Regional Forum established in 1994. By the time the East Asia Summit built in 2005, the central role of ASEAN was clearly defined, and you know that with the establishment of the ASEAN defense ministers meetings, ASEAN centrality has been confirmed through the adoption of this ASEAN-led mechanism. Through this mechanism, major countries having interest in the region can, in one way or in another, can come together to discuss issues related to politics and security and in Indo-Pacific. Also, ASEAN centrality can be attributed to the convert handing by major powers in the context that these countries have not yet arranged the sphere of influence in the region. It is clear that a regional organization with mechanism led by ASEAN like ARF, EIS, or IDMM+, with the participation of all major powers, are key player in the region. The race to unite the forces by the power center is getting stronger in the context of the security interest of small countries intertwined with many different countries, possibly traditional security interests with US, but non-security and economic interests with China and Russia. Therefore, they are likely to become more cautious in international affairs. They will now it is not easy for them to take side. So then, as a result, a mechanism that brings together all major powers, but operates on the principle of consensus like ASEAN, with ASEAN-led mechanism, as I mentioned before, like ARF, EAS, or IDMM+, may be the most likely option. The above are my key three notes that I would like to share today. And I'm sorry that I will leave for the airport in some minutes, so I may not respond to comments or questions of everyone. So I'm so sorry for inconvenience. Thank you so much.
So you're muted. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
So thank you very much for your views, Dr. Xuan Vinh. And the 3 points that you have elaborated upon are very, very relevant for the whole setting of this topic. First of all, what is happening within the region itself, the role of a rising China, the continuing role of Japan, which we cannot ignore. Also, the foreign policies of the other players in the region, how they are responding to the challenges which are being posed by a rising China. You mentioned the Quad in that context, and the fact that there is a rivalry between China and the United States, with China seeking to replace the US in the region. The rise of AUKUS and coming together of putting together of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework by the United States, which you said is a very important initiative. And then you also drew our attention to the fallout of the Russian campaign in Ukraine. And you talked about a new phase, which is beginning in international relations, a new world order which will emerge due to the crises which are arisen as far as energy and production supply chains are concerned. And finally, you drew our attention to how the countries of the region have responded, especially Philippines and Japan, uh, talking about possible replication of the Ukraine-like situation in Asia. And then you also dwelt upon the importance of the centrality of ASEAN and the important decisions that have been taken in this regard. So thank you for setting the stage for us. I wish you could have stayed with us for much longer. But if you are hard pressed and you have to catch that flight, I'm sure the others will not mind, and they will have to field the questions on your behalf when you're not there. But once again, my sincere thanks to you for participation.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.
All right, so we now turn to our next speaker, Dr. Jirayudh Sinthuphan, who's the assistant professor in the Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. So welcome, as professor. You are now requested to present your views in the next 15 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you very much and good morning, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. It's good to see you again, even though it is online. And
Pleasure.
and thank you, for the organizers to invite me to participate in this event. So what I'm going to talk about is about the non-traditional security threats and our structural failures to respond to this emerging crisis as a community. We have always used expressions that we are living in the world community. But for the past 2 years, we have encountered a series of security threats that have revealed our structural failures to respond to these emerging crises as a community. These threats have always been there, right under our noses, but we have just ignored them until they manifested themselves in the form of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine invasions, the unfortunate events, of a political and economic crisis in Sri Lanka, as well as the materialized effect of climate change that leads to the worldwide extreme weather conditions and crops failure. We have been made to believe that during this time of crisis, a group of heroes, maybe from the Marvels or the DC universe, will descend on Earth to help us. But COVID-19 has proved us wrong. Each of us was left to fend for oneself as a country, as a family, or as individuals. All the talk about international cooperations and humanitarian responses has gone down the sink with the closure of borders, the disruptions of global economy and supply chain, and the hoardings of vaccines by rich countries. Even during the peak of the world humanitarian crisis, the vaccines was employed as a weapon of geopolitical warfare, a life-saving invention that should have benefited all the world's population, was used as a reward for one's friends and as an instrument of discrimination for one's foe. Soon after the invasion of Ukraine, countries in the global south have been pressured to take sides. It is as if this country do not possess their own agencies, their own foreign policies, or their own security concerns. When it comes down to the Sri Lankan crisis, which was inevitable and which will probably result in a wider global crisis, I am still surprised that there has been no effort by world leaders or global institutions to come up with a relief plan or any kind of mechanism to stop the crisis from spreading wider. My question is it because of the world institutions are still dictated by the mentality that, quote, Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems, unquote, as His Excellency Subramanyam Jaishankar has put it. If that is the case, it is a structural and existential failure of the world community and its institution. We need a reform, or even we need to come up with alternatives. The global south, the third world, the emerging economy, the non-alignment countries, the Indo-Pacific, or whatever you want to call it, to think for itself about its problems, its concern, and its security. We are here today to commemorate the 30 years anniversaries of Indian-ASEAN relations. Hence, I cannot not talk about ASEAN. 50 years ago, ASEAN was born out of the sense of betrayal. The American interventions in Vietnam was failing, and its Southeast Asian allies were left to fend for themselves. It was then that foreign ministers and statesmen of these countries put their differences and national agenda aside, sitting down together to think about their common threat and a way in which they can help one another to survive those threats. I know that ASEAN had its flaws and that it is not perfect, yet it provides a platform for countries to think and to act for their own survival together. India, Thailand, and ASEAN have any platform to do so. Whether it is bilateral relations between individual countries, ASEAN's Part 6, the Mekong Ganga, or BIMSTEC, or even the Indo-Pacific. Now, we should stop thinking about these platforms simply as a mechanism to push forward individual countries' foreign agendas, but as a platform to imagine our lives, survival, future, and common prosperity as a community. I'm using buzzwords like the common, the community, and common prosperities too often here. It is not because they are fashionable, but because I truly believe that they are the key to our survival. Putting national borders aside, India and ASEAN are physically connected by the Bay of Bengal and the Himalayas. They are the source of our food, trade, and livelihood for different diverse communities living within our state boundaries. But the effect of climate change will certainly pose security threats to that. The Himalaya is melting. The Bay of Bengal is increasingly polluted. We all have experienced extreme weather conditions and rising temperatures, tropical cyclone, coastal erosions, rising sea level, and flooding has become more common and devastating. This will affect the securities of our community in every dimension. Whether it's a food security, health security, socioeconomic security, displacement of community and climate migration. Now, what can be done to ensure that such securities to our region? Certainly, it cannot be an effort of one nation, because unlike nation states, the climate and the environment has no boundary. Also, it is often mistaken that the way to tackle climate change is through environmental conservation alone. In fact, climate change is often caused by human-induced disturbances to fragile balance of nature. There have direct consequences on both states and the society, which are often difficult to reverse or repair. Hence, to wrestle climate change, we also need to solve cultural and socio-economic issues. But what can be done to that issues as a community. On a more abstract level, we are bonded by a globalized financial and monetary market. What is happening in Sri Lanka, Laos, and Myanmar can easily turn into a tsunami that engulfs any economy in the world. In this regard, what can be done to provide security or a safety net for the economy of our region? Recently, I have been reading about the 1997 Asian financial crisis, and I came across the proposals of the Asian Monetary Fund, or the AMF, by Japan as a supplement to the IMF role for macroeconomic and financial surveillance, and for providing policy dialogue as well as for pooling resources at the regional level. Unfortunately, the proposal was based on a lesson learned from the Asian financial crisis, that Asia cannot depend solely on the IMF to act more quickly and appropriately. However, the proposal was strongly opposed by the United States, Europe, the People's Republic of China, and the IMF itself. And that's make me wonder, what kind of fate that Sri Lanka could have had, that if the AMF were put into place to resolve Asia's immediate problems, instead of having to wait for a rescue plan by heroes from the other side of the world. And I see this as a structural and existential failure of the world community, where diverse agencies' needs and security concerns are subjugated by a hangover from colonialism. Maybe it is time for us to stop thinking that Europe's or America's problems is the world's problem, to focus on our own problems and security concerns. Maybe it is time that we also need to rid of the colonial ideological state apparatuses that divide us down religion, ethnics, and state lines to reimagine our survival and common prosperities as a community. So my point is that in order to tackle non-traditional securities, that we need to reimagine our problems. We need to reimagine our religions, our regions, our relationships with one another, in order to find a way to survive and to prosper together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. as usual, it was a very enlightening expose. Some very interesting points that you have raised, especially with regard to a structural issue which exists as far as Asia is concerned, and the idea about Asian Monetary Fund as a supplement to the IMF, which obviously never saw the light of day once it was recommended, um, and the need to focus on our own problems. And of course, talking about non-traditional security threats, you have talked about a whole gamut of issues that have arisen recently. And that, of course, includes the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine events, the events in Sri Lanka, which you laid a lot of emphasis on, and the fact that vaccine was used as a geopolitical weapon during the pandemic and continues to be so, in going forward. So that's the reason why countries in global south, you said, have been forced to take sides. And also, you drew our attention quite clearly to how the Sri Lankan crisis has seen no mechanism which has responded, and that it is, still the mentality that Europe or US problems are the world's problems, but the others' problems are not the problems of Europe and United States. So global South needs to essentially start thinking about its own problems. Um, you also laid a lot of emphasis on the role of ASEAN and how it needs to play a role. And finally, we talked about what is happening, what can be a safety net for the region in the context of this idea of the Asian Monetary Fund. Uh, so, thank you for those enlightening views and some recommendations which are quite unusual and quite far-reaching. And I'm sure there will be a debate and other questions from the audience later on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll now turn to the next speaker, Dr. M. Mayilvaganan, who's the Associate Professor in the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bengaluru. You have 15 minutes. Please present your views.
Okay, sir. I think I'm audible. At the outset, I'd like to thank the ASA, RIC, and ICW for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Since the topic is on the changing security dynamics in India and the context of India, the Southeast Asia relation, what I'm going to do is in the next 10 to 15 minutes is to flag the important traditional and non-traditional security issues that the region witnessing. And at the end, I will relate it with the India-Southeast Asia relation or India-ASEAN relation. When you talk about the security dynamics in the Southeast Asia, the first thing which comes immediately is the traditional security threat. When China is asserting and going aggressive in the region with its own claim on the historical claim of South China Sea, which has claims and over claims by the other littorals in the region. What is more important today is that even after the 2016 International Tribunal's award, that there is no legal basis for China's claim on basis of 9-9. China doesn't stop there. It continues. It tries to intimidate the littorals by using its own the navy, coast guards, and also the fishermen, militia fishermen, by sending the fishing boats. So this confrontation is happening on and off, which is important the security dynamics in the region, which not only affects the region but also the world. And especially when the countries are talking about, like India, talking about the open and free Indo-Pacific, any change that happens in the security domain or maritime security domain in the South China Sea or we say Southeast Asia, it's going to have impact globally. And Unfortunately, as the ASEAN stays, the relationships of the ASEAN stays complex with China, because economically they need to depend on the China. For security reasons, they sometimes look on the US, also the extra regional powers like India. So the relationship itself is very complex, which makes the extra regional powers like India to play much the proactive role in the region. The ASEAN prefers the code of conduct, and as a Asia-China code of conduct will be used, which downplays the great power politics, which downplays the tension in the region, which China projects that they are working with the littorals, but indirectly it doesn't happen. It only intimates the littorals through the other tactics. So this is the changing power. This gives rise to the changing balance of power, where some of the littorals in the Southeast Asia are joining hands with the powers like India, and also showing interest in coming into the how they call it, broader security umbrella of the Quad and others. So this is the first one which I need to flag. The second is the internal. This is the only traditional security threat which I think that is being impacting the region. Remaining all are non-traditional security challenges, and we need to understand that the traditional and non-traditional security challenges in the region are mostly internal. The component of presence of the extra-regional powers are the one which we need to understand from the other side. So when you take the non-traditional security challenges, the region which that weakness, I believe that the first one needs to be highlighted is the illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing in the region. Because this also has a relationship with the, or link with the maritime dispute, the claims and counterclaims. Among the global marine fish protection, the catches I'm saying, the 15% is from the region, and there are I think 6 to 10 major fish producers in the region. Indonesia is the second largest one, and this fishing sector also gives more than 100 million jobs to the people in the region. So the economic liquidity of the trade of fish and the job it provides to the coastal communities, and the revenue which the country earns attracts the some of the what do you call non-state actors, and also the extra-regional the presence of non-state actors in the illegal fishing. There are three major prone area in the Southeast Asia waters. One is the Gulf of Thailand, the second is Indonesian waters, and third is the Malaysia's exclusive economic zone, which are prone to the illegal and unreported unregulated fishing. And unfortunately, most of the poaching is done by the fishermen or the group from the same region. For the Indonesians and Malaysians, the illegal poachers are dominant one in the region, which venture into the other economic zone to have. And this brings the direct confrontation of the countries. So the illegal fishing also leads to the confrontation. Sometimes even the Chinese fishermen coming into the region has brought the confrontation directly, which leads to the contestation between the countries in the region. So what is important is that the countries in the region are saying that they are losing around $40 million dollars per year because of the illegal fishing, and Indonesia alone says they are losing 20 million per year according to the 2014 data. And if it is not going to be controlled and managed, it's going to lead what you call non-traditional security challenges, is going to lead the interstate, the marine contestation further. In spite of ASEAN's effort in combating the illegal fishing, but they have the strategic plan of ASEAN cooperation and fishery 2016 to 2020, which was adopted in 2018. But in spite of that, the illegal fishing is still rampant in the region. One of the reasons is that there is a lack of enforcement, the capacity, capability among the littorals. For example, Indonesia has only the 72 Coast Guard vessels to patrol the entire stretch of 6 million kilometers square kilometer. So unless the countries in the region takes effort in strengthening their the surveillance and the monitoring the capability through the coastal guards or the navy, this is going to continue. And the other issue is related to the earlier one on the maritime dispute. So unless there is a clarity of the defined marine borders, this is going to happen in future. So the resolution of the political solution to the marine disputes in the South China Sea, it's also very important in controlling or in managing the illegal fishing issues in the region. The second, the important non-traditional security issue is the armed robbery at sea, that is the piracy. The reason is that according to the 2022 the International Chamber of Commerce report, the 41% of the piracy in the first 3 months of this year had happened in the Southeast Asian waters. And this is, they're saying that there are 17% increase in spite of the pandemic time. There is an increase in number of piracy, though the incident is very less than the 100. But there is an increase in numbers, they're saying, in last few years trend. And what is more worrying is that when there is war is happening in Ukraine, which has given rise to the oil price, some of the agencies in the region are having a fear that, like similar to 2014, the armed pirates can steal the oil. They can oil from the tanks which are passing through vessels or passing through these waters, and they can sell it black market in the region. So the oil tankers are going to be the major vulnerable target according to the reports that because of the Ukraine war and the oil price rise. The second, they are talking about the containers like steel and others can be going to witness the major pirates attacks according to the International Chamber of Commerce report, and then the regional cooperation, the data from the regional cooperation agreement on combating piracy and armed robbery on the Asia. So these two reports talk about the potential of the pirates attacks in the Southeast Asian waters in spite of the pandemic. What is important here is that in spite of the United Nations law of the sea, Convention of Sea, they're saying that Article 101, where the piracy is being discussed, is not clearly defined. There's a problematic in two reasons. One is that it talks about only the acts committed on the high sea, but most of the piracy or pirates attacks in the Southeast Asian waters are happening in the special economic zones, exclusive economic zones of the countries. So this links in the definition of the middle class. The second, they are saying that the problematic is that the definition talks about 2 ships should be there in to confined into a piracy, but sometimes it is only 1 ship. Where the pirates are now equipped with modern technology. They are also, for example, reported to have GPS technology with them, with the what do you call automated machine guns and rocket propellant. So this is going to be a major threat in the South China Sea waters if it is not going to be addressed by the individual littorals as well as jointly by the countries in the region. Though there is an effort from ASEAN, and then India also supports in controlling the piracy, but we are doing mostly in the East Arabian, some East Andaman Seas. But we do share the data, the necessary information with the countries in the region. The fourth one, which I believe which has an impact in the security dynamics, is the illegal trafficking. When you talk about the illegal trafficking, there are 3 types of illegal trafficking which is very rampant in the region. One is the human trafficking, second is the drug trafficking, And third is the wildlife and forest product trafficking. We talk about the human trafficking because of we call it internal conflict or the internal developments in the countries like Myanmar. The ethnic minorities are affected who flow to the neighboring countries for the livelihood. So these the migrants are vulnerable to the traffickers, and most of the trafficking is happening from Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and they end up in either Thailand, which is the major leading destination for the trafficking victim, or to the Malaysia. Uh, According to the United Nations Office of Drug and Control, the 51% of the East Asia or the Southeast Asia victims are women and children. So this is very important because they all end up in the brothels where sexual exploitation and the labor, the contract labor. This is affecting the population in the region, especially those who are in the lower income and the vulnerable groups like migrants. The other reason which affects the population and pushes them towards the human trafficking is the climate change. The tropical storms annually also impacts, and the Mekong, the lower Mekong river basin witnessed a drought in spite of the water from the Mekong, which is sometimes being diverted or stored by China. These are the climate changes also do contribute to the human trafficking there. The second is the drug trafficking. The Golden Triangle, that is the border of Burma, Laos, and Thailand, has witnessed as one of the world's largest the opium cultivation and heroin production area. And the drugs from there are going to the other regions. So it has an impact on the non-traditional security dynamics, not only the region, also globally. Along with the drug of the opium and heroin, the synthetic drugs also has been 80% manufactured in this region, and it's a cause of concern. The third is the wildlife, trafficking, and one is the illegal, 25% of the illegal trade happens here, like for example, the elephant and pangolin, etc. are smuggled to China due to the medicinal value they sell some of the products. And the timber trafficking is also very high in the region. The fifth important non-traditional security issues which is from the non-traditional security is the religious fundamentalism. So there is the traditional one, the terrorism. In last few years, though there is a decline of the terrorist incident in the Southeast Asia, but the experts or analysts are reporting that there may be a decline in the incident, but they fear that there could be a regrouping and there could be recruitment happening in the ground level. So if it is uncontrolled, then it could see a major impact in the security of the region. The reason they are saying is that those who joined the ISIS from the region, among them, 700 from Indonesia and 100 from Malaysia are being detained at the Al-Hol camp at the northeastern Iraq. These the detainees, if they come back, return to their countries, and if there is no proper rehabilitation, these can again fall back to the national elements, and they can even go back to the terrorism mode. And this is where they are highlighting that the countries has to work more individually and jointly in addressing the future threat which can emanate from the religious fundamentalism. And the next one in terms of the non-traditional security challenges is the climate change as per se, which I have discussed here. The coastal community in the archipelago countries like Indonesia and Philippines, where they see the frequent the storms, cyclones, and then the sea level rise, is impacting around the countries, the land resources, as well as the coastal population. Some of the report says that there's 11% shrink already is estimated by the end of this century. And if the countries are not going to work on mitigating the climate change, this could alter security dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region. The next two issues which I'd like to flag is the Myanmar crisis and the pandemic itself. So the Myanmar crisis, though it is the ASEAN doesn't have a say on the internal issues among the countries, but the Myanmar crisis has an impact because the migration of the affected population is impacting the region. For example, the Rohingyas comes to India and Malaysia. The other ethnic groups like Sangs going to Thailand. So this creates the economic impact on the host country, and they are also vulnerable for the human trafficking. And unless the Myanmar crisis is addressed, the political solution found in Myanmar, these issues are going to continue further. Finally, I would like to touch upon the pandemic itself. Because the COVID pandemic has, I think, reportedly has pushed around 4 million people into extreme poverty, according to 2021 data from the UN. And according to the ASEAN Development Bank report, the 50% of the population, though are fully vaccinated, remaining the unvaccinated population can contribute to the further surge of COVID in future. So they are talking about the vaccination drive that needs to be taken up seriously by the countries. So these are some of the security, the issues or challenges the region is witnessing, in my understanding. To link with India's in the topics are also the India and Southeast Asia the relationship. I think India has upgraded its relationship in the last 30 years. Now it's like a summit level partnership and strategic and defense also plays an important role in the India-Southeast Asia relation. India is part of the ASEAN Defense Ministers and East Asia Summit, etc. India also works through individual countries on defense cooperation, and according to one of the report the news report that even the Philippines and Indonesia expressed in procuring or purchasing the BrahMos missile because of the threat which they feel from China. So this defense cooperation is increasing between India and the countries of Southeast Asia. The maritime component is getting much more important in the India-ASEAN relationship. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi rightly said that India's passage to the Quad would be through the ASEAN. So I believe that ASEAN is centrality in ASEAN or Southeast Asia is going to be the important component in the India's relationship with the region and the Indo-Pacific region, and it's going to be an important aspect in the coming days. So with this, I would like to thank again, and if there's anything, we'll take it up.
Thank you, Dr. Mayilvaganan. I think it was a most comprehensive presentation, especially on the non-traditional security threats that you presented to us. Of course, you started off by rightly pointing out to the issues that have arisen because of the aggressive actions of China and the fact that historical claims which have no basis are being pushed forward. And despite the rulings of the International Court, the Chinese have not gone back on the line proposal that they had put forward. Then, of course, there are these continuing gray zone tactics by China in the South China Sea, which you referred to. And the fact that the ASEAN has not been able to pin down China on the code of conduct so far. Problems of non-traditional threats to security, like fisheries, for instance, illegal fishing in particular, and how it affects the jobs in the region. Lack of enforcement capacity being an important factor. Then you referred to also piracy in the sea, and as far as Southeast Asian countries are concerned, referring to two very important reports in that context. Human trafficking with the emphasis on the lower Mekong region, drug trafficking mainly in the Golden Triangle, religious fundamentalism, and also how the vaccination drive is so important now because of COVID-19 and has to be taken up urgently in many of the countries of the region. And you rightly pointed out that India has, of course, upgraded its relationship with the region in the last 30 years. Defense cooperation is increasing, and ASEAN will be a very important component in India's relationship with the larger Indo-Pacific going forward. Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. I'd like to now turn to Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh. We have exactly 15 minutes for
It's
you
11 o'clock.
if we have to have that discussion with the rest of the audience at the end. So please, if you can time yourself and stick to the 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa. And at the outset, I would like to thank Indian Council of World Affairs, ASEAN India Center, and RIS for inviting me to participate in this international conference to commemorate 30 years of India-ASEAN relations. The rapidly changing geopolitical environment presents India with both challenges and opportunities. What are the main triggers for the changing security dynamics? In my opinion, the three main triggers include the rise of China and Sino-US rivalry, COVID-19 pandemic, and the Ukraine crisis. In the coming decades, these will shape the contours of India's relationship with Southeast Asian countries. China's rise presents a continuing economic and strategic challenge. India faced the brunt of it on its own extensive land border, just as many ASEAN countries faced Chinese aggression on the maritime front in South China Sea. India decided not to join the Belt and Road Initiative, while ASEAN countries did so because they remained cautiously optimistic about it, given Sri Lanka's recent experience, Hambantota port, and also debt trap concerns. They have chosen to balance their security concerns with economic needs. China is also displaying some belligerence, military belligerence towards Taiwan. The Sino-US rivalry, while it added to the economic difficulties of the region by disrupting regional and global supply chains, also threw up competing systems for the region's attention. On the one hand is China's BRI, on the other is US and Western world's free and open Indo-Pacific. India's membership of the quadrilateral framework is aimed at creating a strategic balance in the Indo-Pacific. The second major concern is COVID-19 pandemic, which originated in late 2019 in Wuhan and spread as a global pandemic that has turned the international opinion against Beijing for the simple reason that China concealed the outbreak from the world through its international campaign of disinformation and its wolf warrior diplomacy, basically to deflect responsibility for the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has once again shown that India and ASEAN countries, which have a tradition of HADR cooperation in the past, can be a valuable support to each other. The third one is the Ukraine crisis and the role of Russia. Ukraine war has lasted longer than expected perhaps by Russia itself. Its impact on food security and energy security is being felt at a global level. It has affected regional and global supply chains. The Ukraine crisis has impacted both India and Southeast Asia, particularly because Russia has been traditionally a supplier of military hardware to these countries. Instead of taking the focus away from the Indo-Pacific, the opposite has happened. Russia faces opposition from the West. India has adopted a neutral stance on Russia. A large component of our military hardware comes from there. Now alternatives are being thought of. Vietnam has an even larger component of military hardware from Russia. How does Hanoi respond to these challenges? Today, the challenge for the region and the world is not only about how to deal with these three issues on the economic downturn, it is also about how best to redefine the international order, which not only has rising powers like China, but there are also middle powers, which include Australia, Japan, and India as well, each having its own aspirations. Now I come to what are the major implications for India and Southeast Asia relations. In all the three policies that India follows, the neighborhood first, the Act East policy, and the Indo-Pacific policy, ASEAN centrality forms the basis. And all three policies work in tandem. We are also marking some important anniversaries now. At the regional level this year, we are celebrating the ASEAN-India Friendship Year. And then there are the summit partnership anniversaries, the 20 years, 10 years of strategic partnership. So that's where the significance lies for this, what is happening today. India contributes to influencing, if not shaping, the regional security agenda. India hosted the first special ASEAN-India Foreign Ministers meeting on June 15th, 2022. ASEAN-India Foreign Ministers meetings are hosted by the ASEAN chair on an annual basis, but this particular meeting was the first ASEAN-India Foreign Ministers meeting to be hosted by India in New Delhi. It was preceded by the 24th ASEAN-India Senior Officials meeting. The 12th iteration of the Delhi Dialogue, themed Building Bridges in the Indo-Pacific, was held on June 16th to 17th this year. There are other sub-regional frameworks in which we are also involved. India cooperates with ASEAN through some of the sub-regional frameworks like the Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA, the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multisectoral and Economic Cooperation, BIMSTEC, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle, and the Brunei, Darussalam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East Asian, East ASEAN Growth Triangle, and the Mekong Ganga Cooperation and the ACMEX. Now, we have seen some enhanced defense and strategic cooperation between India and Southeast Asia. India-ASEAN defense cooperation has been gathering momentum in recent years, with growing emphasis on potential areas of cooperation in defense production, besides military exercises. Joint military training, HADR, these are some of the other areas of in which we are cooperating with Southeast Asia. India signed a contract worth $375 million in January 2022 to provide the Philippines BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles. Indonesia also has shown interest in these. Now, there are some countries within Southeast Asia, within ASEAN, with which we have somewhat closer defense ties or strategic relationships. Vietnam tops that. India and Vietnam upgraded their relations to comprehensive strategic partnership in 2016. In June 2022, Indian Defense Minister Mr. Rajnath Singh paid a visit to Vietnam. During this visit, he handed over 12 high-speed guard boats to Vietnam, which had been constructed under Government of India's $100 million defense line of credit to Vietnam. The other important country is Indonesia. Indonesia also upgraded its relations. India also upgraded our relations with Indonesia to Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement level in May 2018, with the potential to link Prime Minister Modi's vision of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, with President Joko Widodo's global maritime fulcrum policy. The other very important country, which is also our next door neighbor, is Myanmar. Myanmar's transition to democracy, however, suffered a setback following a military coup by Senior General Min Aung Hlaing on 1st February. Myanmar is the linchpin of our Act East policy. In fact, Act East policy was announced from Naypyidaw in 2014. It's the only ASEAN country with which we share land border. And our strategic interests of the land border and in the Bay of Bengal are closely involved in this. While India welcomed ASEAN's 5-point consensus on Myanmar, it does not support sanctions regime against the country. India has, with the region as a whole, focused on capacity building and believes that the rule of law and democratic process must be upheld, and those detained in Myanmar must be released. India's strategic engagement with ASEAN members seeks to foster closer understanding. India has comprehensive strategic partnership with 2 of the ASEAN countries, Indonesia and Vietnam, in the larger region with Australia also. It has enhanced strategic partnership with Malaysia. It has strategic partnership with Singapore and ASEAN also. ASEAN-led dialogue mechanisms like the post-ministerial conference with India, EMC+1, East Asia Summit, ARF, ADMM+, expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum are some of the ASEAN-led forums with which India is constantly in touch. India is co-chair of the ADMM+ Experts Working Group on HADR. As far as maritime cooperation is concerned, it affects India directly, as the bulk of its trade is via maritime routes and requires freedom of navigation and security of slocks. Even though India is not a party to any disputes in South China Sea, it has a significant stake in stability of the region, because any conflict would disrupt flow of trade. India has advocated freedom of navigation. India's initiative of Sagar and Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, IPOI, seeks to harmonize its Act East policy with ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific, AOIP. Sagar depends on securing end-to-end supply chains in the region, no disproportionate dependence on a single country, and ensuring prosperity for all stakeholder nations. The IPOI was introduced at the East Asia Summit in 2019. It has 7 pillars: marine security, maritime ecology, maritime resources, capacity building, and resource sharing, disaster risk reduction and management, science and technology and academic cooperation, trade connectivity, and maritime transport. Then I come to the other issue that is of concern, tackling transnational crime. India and ASEAN are committed through ASEAN Plan of Action in combating transnational crime 2016 to 2025 to ensure peace and stability. For this, the early finalization of ASEAN plus India senior officials meeting work program should be a welcome sign. Now, looking at the way forward, in conclusion, India's defense cooperation with ASEAN will continue to gather further momentum. The ASEAN-India Defense Ministers' informal meeting will be held in November 2022, and the ASEAN-India Maritime Exercise and the field training exercise of the ADM Plus Experts Working Group on HADR will be held in Indonesia in 2023. India and ASEAN relations have reached maturity, and things can be frankly and openly discussed. There is no need to brush differences under the carpet. Cambodia is the ASEAN chair this year, and Singapore is the country coordinator as far as India is concerned. We've heard the Singapore High Commissioner speak in the inaugural session, and since we have good relations with both these countries, we should look to an interesting year ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh. Once again, a very comprehensive presentation by you. Again, starting off with the traditional threat, which most of the panelists have referred to on the Chinese BRI, and how India did not join it, but then ASEAN did because they wanted to be optimistic about it, and that trend still continues. Of course, there is Chinese belligerence which continues towards Taiwan, and that the reason why India joined the Quad, according to you, was to create a balance in the Indo-Pacific. Ukraine issue, you said that has affected India and ASEAN equally because Russia is a traditional military supplier in particular, and also because the capacity of countries to adapt is limited, so it causes that those many adaptability problems which accompany these developments. You talked about the engagement of India with ASEAN, the military exercises, HADR, and the relationships that we have with important countries in the region like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, etc. And the India-ASEAN engagements that have been engaged in quite recently, transnational crime, which has emerged as an important segment of cooperation. And you ended up on the optimistic note that defense cooperation with ASEAN will continue to gather momentum. So once again, very comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much. I think we've had a good round of presentations. And now we have some time for discussion. So I'll first look at the questions in the chat box. The first question is to Dr. Sinthuphan. How does ASEAN plan to address Asia's problems, such as the Sri Lankan crisis, climate change, etc., which you mentioned?
Okay. In terms of the financial crisis, because we have had experienced that in the 90s, and I think what have been put in place because AMF was not realized, the proposal was not accepted, but I think we have what is called the Chiang Mai initiatives, where in which the Asian +3 countries can involve, can engage in the swap arrangement, where they can help one another to secure the financial securities, and also to borrow from one another to overcome the balance of payment during the time of difficulties. And I think they because I'm not from the financial sectors, but what I have heard, they have established the BSC bilateral swaps arrangements where where they hold together the reserves or resources to to be available for the ASEAN's member countries, ASEAN plus 3 member countries in the times of crisis. And for the issue of climate change, well, ASEAN's, like many other organizations in the world, they have a lot of strategic plans. They have a lot of they have a lot of policy, and and it works to a certain extent. But for me as a person, working in the field, of trying to promote the idea, the idea of of climate change. We still consider that it is just a strategic plan that look at the issue of climate change in terms of natural conservations and in terms of preventions of natural disaster, but not in terms of the socio-economic issues. For example, the problems that we have yearly is the problem of agricultural haze, when the farmers in different country burns the stubs and then create pollutions, especially in that comes to big city. And the issues has been tackled as the farmer. We need to make the farmers to stop burning rice stub, but they don't look at it in terms of that the way that we will be able to resolve these issues is to raise the incomes or the agricultural price, the price of agricultural products, or a transfer of technologies to poorer farmers in poorer countries, and instead of expecting to get cheaper produces from those countries. So I think in terms of in that respect, ASEANs still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much. I have the next question from Dr. Ankita. It says, as the impact of the Ukraine crisis is not confined to Europe, and as it drags on economically, politically, and diplomatically, how will it impact the Asian order? So I'd like to ask Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh first, and then Dr. Mayilvaganan to address this question, because it's addressed to the general panel.
Thank you, sir. I think what he's wanting to know is how this is impacting Asia. I think the most important way in which it is impacting is that Europe has to also walk the talk. If it is adopting a certain position on Russia, then it has to also do the needful with regard to when they get the gas from Russia, and when through their policy which they have laid out for the Indo-Pacific. So the kind of leverage that India and some of the other countries have vis-a-vis Europe, I see in ASEAN would be ASEAN. That would be one leverage of dealing with Europe. And the other is through India's own interactions in the Quad, because Europe and France, they've all come out with their own Indo-Pacific policy. So on the Ukraine question, the Europe is also getting dragged into into Asia. There has been a greater and greater involvement of Europe with ASEAN's activities, with Asia in general. So I think this is going to be an opportunity for both ASEAN and India to interact with the European Union and to draft a common approach on how to deal with such issues in the future.
Thank you. Dr. Mayilvaganan.
Thank you, sir. The question is about how the Ukraine war crisis will impact the Asian order. As of now, the Ukraine crisis is limited to Europe, only on economic, which has an impact globally. But I believe if the crisis is not going to end soon, there may be a political impact in the Asian order. The reason why I'm saying is that already if you see in the Asian, the countries among the region, they have taken a multiple different set of approaches. For example, Myanmar junta has welcomed the Moscow's decision, but Singapore has condemned the invasion. Countries like India and Vietnam have abstained from the UN outing, and they are neutral because we depend on the oil and exports, import. So if the war is going to continue further, there may be division, particularly there may be division within the Asian countries. And already we have seen the countries like Japan and Korea have gave a reservation about how the US is not doing much enough in supporting the Ukraine. There is a perception that the US may not come to the rescue in future if China is going to attack. Eventually, there is any war between the China, Japan, or China and the Korea. There's a perception that the US is not going to come immediately, except giving some economic aid and arms supply. So this perception, if it is going to develop, I think there may be some the crack in the Asian order, but it is hypothetical and depends upon how the crisis in Ukraine goes further.
Thank you so much. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question? We have just a few minutes left. I don't see any other questions coming up right now. So we have just 2 minutes to go. So I'd like to end this session, and I'd like to thank, first of all, Dr. Jirayudh Sinthuphan, Dr. Mayilvaganan, Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh, and in absentia, Dr. Xuan Vinh, who had to leave us earlier. It's been a very rich discussion, some very interesting viewpoints that were presented, and we've had the benefit of experience of all of you and learned a lot during this session. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much to the audience for being patiently listening and also asking those questions. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of ICWA and AIC, we would like to thank the chair and all the speakers. We will start with session 5 on economic cooperation in about 2 minutes. And we already have our panelists, so